Good afternoon. Today's topic for training is the next in the series in procurement. We're going to discuss the procurement plan. You should have received notification that the 21-22 procurement plan, sample procurement plan, has been saved to the CMP website. But please note that that is just a sample. Each SFA should have their own documented procedures for procurement, and it should reflect what they are actually doing. SFAs that develop their procurement documents based on the sample procurement plan and they follow the guidance that we've provided have had far less findings than SFAs that have developed their own procurement plan. Of course, please be reminded that the sample procurement plan should be changed to meet the needs of your school food authority. We're going to talk about micro purchases first. And this is just a review of each procurement type. So remember that the dollar value cannot exceed $10,000. You have to distribute micro purchases equitably, and you do not need competitive quotes. Now, during your procurement review, the reviewer will look at your micro purchases to ensure that multiple suppliers were used for like items. If they weren't, it would be a finding on a review. The micro purchase procedures in your procurement plan have to include how it's going to equitably distribute the micro purchases amongst qualified suppliers. So I've included a sample of the chart that's in your procurement plan. And as you can see, each of these planned purchases are using the micro purchase method. This SFA decided what items they were going to purchase using the micro purchase method. And number one is office supplies. So in order to meet the requirement, they're going to purchase office supplies from both Walmart and Home Depot. That will assure that they are spreading the wealth. The second is the t-shirts that they buy for their employee uniforms, and they're going to alternate purchases between two different t-shirt shops. And then for miscellaneous repairs, they have also going to use micro purchases, and they're alternating between Home Depot and Lowe's. Of course, Home Depot and Lowe's, it's not going to carry all of the specialty parts that are often needed in school food service. But the SFA could also use the micro purchase method for these kind of parts, as well as long as the purchase does not exceed that $10,000 threshold. SFA would still need to make sure that they distribute those micro purchases equitably. So if you're using one parts house for one purchase, then choose another one for the next purchase. We always get a lot of questions about using the micro purchase method in small towns where you may have only one grocery store within 40 miles. And so what we tell everyone is to make sure to indicate if you're doing miscellaneous groceries from one grocery store because the next grocery store is 40 miles away, please indicate that on your procurement plan, because we know that it's not reasonable to expect that the SFA will utilize more than one grocery store if they have to go 40 miles. So just indicate it on your procurement plan, and when someone comes to audit you, then you would be in compliance. Let's talk a minute about small purchases. Remember that the small purchase method can be used if it's below the $30,000 threshold, unless the district has a lower threshold. I've seen some district thresholds that are as low as $1,000. In this district, threshold is less than $20,000. So they have to use the district threshold because it's more restrictive than the state threshold. Remember, on quotes, you still have to have specifications and you still have to provide them to each vendor. You want to make sure you provide clear and accurate descriptions of the technical requirements. Make sure you include the Buy American where applicable, and make sure that you obtain at least 3 quotes from 3 different responsible and responsive vendors, and make sure you document all of your quotes. There were numerous findings on administrative reviews because SFA said they got quotes, but they didn't maintain the documentation. And I really always recommend obtaining written quotes versus verbal quotes to make sure that the vendors receive the same information and specifications. So you're going to award your quote to the most responsive and responsible vendor that has the lowest cost. Remember that responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all of the specifications and terms. Responsible means that they're capable of performing successfully. And then, of course, then you're going to go to the lowest price. So what constitutes an adequate number of sources? You must have 3 sources to contact. It's a good practice to obtain it in writing. 3 eligible sources that are able and willing to compete for your business. Again, maintain all of your documentation. As you can see from this chart in the procurement plan, the school food authority states the companies they plan to contact for quotes. Right. Sorry. If you find other vendors, certainly you can add them to your list, but that way it reminds them to get 3 quotes from at least 3 different companies. So for example, this is a small SFA and they're going to seek quotes from 3 different produce companies: Louisiana Fresh, Matronas, and Capital City. We just have to always remember that if our quotes in a year add up to more than $30,000, then we've used the wrong procurement method and we should have used the formal procurement method. You can also use online quotes as sources for small quotes. Just make sure that, again, you print that online quote and keep it for your documentation. Remember that during your administrative review, the state agency has to determine whether, in their judgment, free and open competition has occurred. And so it's very important to maintain all of your documentation to support the award process. Let's review formal procurement for a minute. Make sure that any formal procurement that you're going to use is going to be in your formal procurement section of the procurement plan. We've talked a lot about there's 2 types, an IFB and an RFP that can be used. And so you're going to add all of your formal procurements to the formal procurement table. So in this instance, the SFA is anticipating all of the formal procurements that they will need. And they're going to purchase all their frozen foods, meats, vegetables, bakery, pasta, cleaning supplies, paper supplies, plastic supplies. They're going to have a full line distributor that can bid on all of those items. And they can do that as long as they have 3 or more companies that are able and willing to compete. The SFA also plans to use an IFB for fresh bread and will award it as a bottom line bid, meaning that it's the bottom line total. In order for a company to be responsive to a bottom line bid, they must be able to supply all items the SFA is requesting. And then for the dish machine and services, this SFA has decided to use a formal RFP because the service that's provided by the company is important. So the SFA is going to develop criteria that they will use to evaluate each prospective vendor. When advertising the procurement, you have to announce it in ways that do not restrict free and open competition. You have to utilize more than one announcement method to reach the widest possible audience. If you use only direct mailings or direct email, that is going to limit competition. So to advertise, you want to make sure that you use local newspapers, trade periodicals, procurement websites, and direct mailings. Oh, excuse me. I think Courtney's lunch is killing me. When you do your advertisement, it has to contain, excuse me, a general description of what items are to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, and the date written responses will be provided. The deadline for submission of proposals and the address for the complete solicitation, including specifications and bid forms, can be obtained. And of course, you have to include the non-discrimination statement. Remember that the bid has to be published twice in a regional newspaper that is in your locality. Please remember that a small town newspaper is not considered a regional newspaper. The first advertisement has to be at least 15 days before the bid opening. In addition to the newspaper, public SFAs must also publish by electronic media. SFAs could choose the electronic bid platform. There are a number of bid sites that do not charge the SFA, but charge the vendor for using.
The solicitation must clearly define the purchase conditions. Items that must be included are contract period, date, time, and location of bid openings, and how the vendor will be informed of bid results. Terms and conditions each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated. Benefits to SFA if contractor does not perform as contracted. Statement regarding the return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits. The solicitation must include piggybacking if this will be allowed. If applicable, include an escalation, de-escalation clause based on a cost index. The solicitation must also include the method of evaluation and type of contract. Specific bid procedures must be included, and all solicitations must include the access requirement by SFA, state agency, USDA, and the Comptroller General. The solicitation must clearly define the purchase conditions. Purchase conditions must include requiring the awarded contractor to maintain all required records for 3 years after final payment. The solicitation must also include a description of the order process. The SFA must also sign the non-collusion statement, often called the Independence Price Certificate. Detailed specifications and estimated quantities of products must be included as well. The optional provision to compare all prices received from bids to the State of Louisiana Office of State Purchasing pricing can also be included in bids. By using this provision, if the Office of State Purchasing price is lower, the SFA has the flexibility to use the state contract. In addition, they do not have to obtain all of the required procurement documents from OSP because the SFA has properly procured. Vendors may decrease the prices they quote because they have access to the prices on state contract. The state contracts are especially useful in rural areas where SFAs have a difficult time getting vendors to bid. When a vendor contracts with OSP, they agree to serve the entire state, regardless of location.
Affirmative action. All formal solicitations must include the affirmative action steps as outlined in 2 CFR 200.321. These steps are intended to assure that minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used whenever possible. The affirmative action steps must also be included in the bid solicitation. The affirmative action steps will include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises on solicitation lists, assuring that small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises are solicited whenever they are potential sources, and dividing total requirements when economically feasible into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority businesses and women's businesses. Additional affirmative action steps that must be included in your solicitation is establishing delivery schedules where the requirement permits, which encourages participation by small and minority businesses and women's businesses, using the services and assistance as appropriate of such organizations as the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency of the Department of Commerce, and requiring the prime contractor, if subcontracts are to be let, to take the affirmative action steps listed in 1 through 5. While the affirmative action statement and steps have to be included in the solicitation, the SFA must also indicate in their procurement plan how this is going to be accomplished. I've included 2 links here that can be researched in order to find qualified small and minority businesses and women's businesses. It's both the SBA list and the Hudson Initiative list. You should print the Hudson list and keep it with your documentation for your solicitation. The Small Business Association list is massive, but I would maintain an electronic copy because you'll be asked on an administrative review what steps you took to assure that minority businesses and women's businesses were solicited whenever possible. Remember that if you're using an RFP, you're going to have a set of weighted award criteria. And even though price is not the only factor, it must be the primary factor and must count for more than any other factor. The RFP is awarded to the most responsive vendor that is the most advantageous to the SFA with price and other factors considered. This is a sample RFP scorecard, and there is a copy in your sample procurement plan. The SFA can include their own scoring criteria and the weight of each criteria, as long as price is the primary factor. If you're doing a bid for commodity processing, you must indicate what value pass-through method will be used. And there has to be a provision for information in your bid and responses for food recall procedures. USDA requires that the vendor provide contact information and backup information for 2 people that will handle food recalls. And the SFA must also have a person and a backup person for handling food recalls. We've had a number of findings on procurement reviews for not including this information in their procurement plan. When you're using a cost reimbursable contract, you have to include a provision that states that allowable costs will be paid to the vendor minus any discounts, rebates, and/or credits. You also have to make sure that the that in a cost reimbursable contractor, that the contractor excludes all unallowable costs from its billing documents. And they also have to certify that only allowable costs are submitted for payment. And records have been established that maintain the visibility of unallowable costs, including directly associated costs in a manner suitable for contract cost determination and verification. The contractor must identify the amount of each discount, rebate, and/or other applicable credit on bills and invoices presented to the SFA for payment, and individually identify the amount as a discount or a rebate, or in the case of other applicable credits, the nature of the credit. If approved by the state agency, the school food authority can permit the contractor to report this information on a less frequent basis than monthly, but no less frequently than annually. There are additional requirements for contracting with a food service management company, and we're just kind of briefly go through those because the food service management contract has steps all on its own. Just making sure that you adhere to the procurement standards, that they follow the state agency's agreement. They monitor food service operations through periodic visits, and that the SFA must retain control of the quality, extent, and nature of its food service and the prices to be charged for children. They have to retain signature authority. They have to make sure that all USDA foods are credited to the school food service account only. Make sure that they maintain health certification and have an active advisory board. They must obtain written approval from the state agency before issuing an FSMC request for proposal. They have to make sure and use the LDOE required prototype that is available on our website. They have to monitor the food service management company to ensure that they are compliant with the Buy American provisions. And they have to conduct reconciliation at least annually and a contract termination to make sure that they receive full credit for their commodities. The next type of procurement is a non-competitive proposal, and it's only available for use if it's only from one single source. When the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive negotiation. And non-competitive proposals can only be used when the item is available from a single source only, whether we have an emergency that doesn't permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. The awarding agency authorizes non-competitive proposals. After soliciting from a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate. All non-competitive proposals must be approved by the state agency. You can do a non-competitive procurement for a one-time purchase of food items that are to be used as samples to determine acceptance by students. The SFA must maintain documentation of the item name, the dollar amount, the vendor used, and the reason for the non-competitive procurement. Non-competitive proposals in emergency. I think we are all familiar with that. You can use non-competitive proposals in an emergency situation. It must be approved by an SFA official, and you must keep a log of the emergency purchases that the SFA makes. And at a minimum, the following documents should be, or the following procedures should be documented: the item name, the dollar amount, the vendor, and the reason for the emergency. We need to talk a little bit about utilizing other organizations' contracts that's in your procurement plan. You always need to refer to memo 18-79, because the trick to using another organization's contract is that you, as the SFA, must ensure that the original solicitation was properly let and awarded. In order to do that, you have to obtain and maintain all of the documents listed in memo 18-79. And there is a significant number of documents that you must obtain, and they're often very hard to get. So you need to obtain all of the documents that are in that memo 18-79, and you must maintain them on file at the SFA in the event of a, excuse me, in the event you're going to be audited. So if you're going to use a market basket for procurement, you must make sure that you award it using an established representative sample of goods. F&S recommends that you have that your market basket include at least 75% of the estimated value of your contract, not the number of items, but the estimated value. And we have to have a representative sample of goods. Before awarding a market basket contract, the SFA must also obtain pricing for the remaining goods that are not included in the analysis before the award. In other words, they have to obtain the pricing before they award the contract of everything that is listed on the contract. The pricing of all of these goods has to be reasonable, and it must have clear and accurate specifications. You'll see this is an additional clause in the procurement plan that you can use if you choose. It's in the 21-22 sample procurement plan. And it talks about modifications to acquire additional goods. And so USDA allows us to add additional goods or quantities of goods to a contract as long as the verbiage is in the contract when it is let and awarded. So I put some verbiage in the procurement plan that says that an SFA can add additional goods and quantities of goods up to 5 to 10% of the estimated value of the contract, which gives them some flexibility in case they find a new item, or if they end up needing more of an item than they thought, they can choose, and USDA recommends no more than 5 to 10% of the estimated value of the contract. So, and you have to keep records. That's the bad part, is you got to make sure that you don't exceed whatever percentage you put in there. You need to make sure that you don't exceed that in your contract. You can also put in your contract and your procurement plans that you may want to renew a contract for an additional year. The additional goods and/or quantities may be added to the contract upon renewal using a contract amendment. Each year of a renewed contract has a new cost basis. So if you added additional goods during this year to a contract, you would add it to your cost basis for the next year's contract. But USDA does recommend that contracts not be extended for more than 3 years. I always try to include this because I want to make sure that everyone understands that the state agency does not expect or want for the SFAs that that an SFA has to hold on to a contract and maintain a contract with a vendor who has not demonstrated good performance during either a current contract or a previous contract with the SFA. And we want to make sure that you give yourself the flexibility to have a contractor considered a non-responsible bidder so that you can reject their bid. And of course, it all hinges upon proper documentation. So the 21-22 procurement plan does contain some sample termination language for termination for cause, termination for convenience, and some sample language for disqualifying a bidder. There is a process for disqualifying a bidder. So if you need to disqualify a bidder, make sure that you include that in your original contract. Okay, and if we have any questions, please feel free to contact us at the Division of Nutrition Support. The telephone number is here. Make sure that you go in and to the Pennington Fit Kids website. So I'm back in on the calendar and go right above where the agenda is and complete the survey so that you can get credit for the course. I also want to ask everyone to do this for me. I am putting together our procurement overview, our next webinar, and I've gotten a number of what I guess I could call faux pas that different SFAs had by either language that they put in the contract that didn't allow them to have the flexibility that they needed, or just other little problems that they had. And so I'm trying to put that together to come up with something that we can share with everyone so that everyone can learn from anyone's mistakes that they make. I'm not asking for names. I'm not gonna put the names of the SFA or the person who had the faux pas. But if you have any that you think would be helpful and useful for other SFAs to learn from, please send them to me. You can send them to my email address, babatlanius@la.gov, or to this address here, Child Nutrition Programs at la.gov. I'd really appreciate it because I think if when we, some of the biggest lessons we learn by making mistakes, and those are the ones we remember the most. And we certainly want to help others not make the same mistakes. So if you have any things that have happened, please let me know so that I can add them to my next procurement series, next in our procurement series, which is the procurement overview. I have a couple of questions. What if a company does not give a price for each item on your IFB? Is this a bottom line bid, and how should you score? If you have a bottom line bid, then it depends on how you word it. If you do a bottom line bid and every person is supposed to bid on the same items and it's an all or nothing bid, then you can deem them non-responsive if they don't have all the items on your bid. How would you keep up the additional goods in a co-op? Very carefully. I guess you'd have to have one person that would maintain that documentation. I've not ever even thought about how to keep up with that, because you have different people ordering. So you'd have to do some type of monthly report so that you can be sure that you don't go over that 5 to 10% limit. This question says, I know we have to advertise. What all should be included in the advertisement? If you go to your sample procurement plan, there is a list of everything that has to be included in your advertisement. And one of the things that I've noticed is SFAs have sent in a copy of their advertisement to me, is that they are using many, many more words than they need to. We need to make them short and concise. Look at this, like 6 or 7 items in the procurement plan that you have to include in your, I think I even have a slide on it here. But to make sure that you don't include more than you have to. I was talking to an SFA this morning, and we were talking about, she had only 2 formal procurements that she had to do. And so I told her to make sure that she got all of the information together and she could do both of the advertisements at one time and include, it was for a full line distributor and also for a milk distributor. And so they could include the advertisement for those 2 together and save a little money. Okay. And in answer to your question about the advertisement, it must contain a general description of items to be purchased. Now, that's not just of each item, but categories of items. The deadline for submitting questions and the date written responses will be provided. The date of a pre-bid meeting, if it's applicable, and if attendance is required. The deadline for submitting proposals. The address for the complete solicitation, including specifications and bid forms, can be obtained, and the short version non-discrimination statement. Okay, the next question is, we have wording to allow a response for questions / omissions within 24 hours in a bottom line bid. We carefully inquire, like, I cannot read the amount you wrote on item XYZ. Can you tell me what it says? Usually you do this in an email to get an email response. Okay. Okay, I don't see any more questions there. Certainly, if you have additional questions, please feel free to call us again. We're happy to help. If not, if that's all, then everyone have a good day.